I'd never seen before. That story is also about a legal case, and also very unfortunate. I'm sorry that my examples are traumatic. I'll think of a happier one later. But this guy in Seattle broke in and assaulted these two women, basically with intent to murder. One woman, the women tried to escape. One succeeded, one died. And the one who escaped with her life testified against the assailant who had harmed her. I don't think they were married, they were dating. It was a lesbian couple, her partner. And the story was about the bravery that took to encounter this guy, to sit there at trial and to tell what he had done to a person you loved. It's this incredible story. And it does this technique thing I'd never seen before, which is it starts at trial. And it's sort of scenic. You're in the building, you see the judge, you see this woman on the stand. And then it does this thing where it'd be like, the woman shifted around in the witness stand and scratched her neck where the man had gripped her. She recalled his weight on her body. He had spoken loudly and swore a lot. His voice up close had, his breath had smelled like vinegar. She had felt so terrified, feeling the rattling of his heartbeat in her own chest. As she told this at trial, jurors began to hand tissues to each other. You see what's happening there? It's a nested scene. It's a scene within a scene. You have the outer structure of the trial and this person's testimony. And within that, not a conventional flashback, but a mini flashback into months or years prior, through the dialogue sort of her testimony, what she had been through. And so you're telling two timelines concurrently with these dips back and forth. But you never lose track because this woman is the pivot point. I thought, oh my God, I can do that. But rather than do it with just one character, I'll do it with all the characters. So I did this. Why not tell the story? I don't want to fall off this thing. The story, use the trial as the outer skeleton and show, as each person testifies, these little nested scenes of flashbacks. And so the police investigation and the alibi get recreated scenically within the structure of the trial. And I decided I wanted to do the police investigation first and then the alibi. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is that the alibi is pretty mundane. Dude goes to work. Dude comes home from work and kisses his girlfriend. Dude goes to his second job. Dude drives down to Shelby. I mean, the only reason this is freighted with drama at all is if you know he's about to get arrested. Because then he's on a clock. And you're watching him inch closer and closer to his own fate. Otherwise, it's just a dude wandering around. So to lead with the alibi, the reader would think, why are we just following this guy around for no reason? So they have to know something bad's going to happen to him. A police investigation, even if you have sort of no personal investment in how it goes, is a naturally dramatic thing. There's a reason that so many TV shows follow this. I mean, you've got people uncovering evidence, driving around town in cop cars with sirens and walkie-talkies and guns in their belt. You've got, you know, them trying to find witnesses. There's natural drama there. And so if I lead in a way that there isn't with his alibi, so if I lead with this, the reader will get pulled in just by that natural structure, and then I'll be able to do the alibi second, and this will be freighted with the drama of knowing that this landed on him. There's one exception to this structure, which is that I decided I did want to do the crime outside of this. There are a couple reasons for this. One is I just couldn't find a good way. The crime is such a dramatic thing, such a big thing, that I couldn't find a good way to fit it into this structure. To do that kind of flattened it in a way. It made it seem sort of on par in significance with the police investigation, with the alibi, and it wasn't. It didn't feel that way to me. It was this extraordinary act of trauma. And it's the light to the fuse. It's the thing that causes all that. This one night in October 1987 that changes the lives of not just Willie and not just Carrie Elliott, but their friends, their families, the community. I mean, it's the first domino. And so I wanted to lead with it. And in addition to that, just because of the nature of how police investigations work, I noticed that the crime was also the thing for which I had the most textural and in-depth detail. I had photography from this woman's house and bedroom. I had her testimony afterward about what psychologically that had felt like. I had the most specific timeline of what had happened minute by minute by minute. And so I had this opportunity to recreate in a really full, rich way a dramatic scene. And I thought it would be a mistake to not take advantage of that opportunity, in addition to just the sort of significance of what had happened. So this is basically the structure of the first chapter. And you have this experience of this terrible thing happens. This became the prologue. Chapter 1 begins here. And you watch as police, within the outer structure of the trial, you're watching a trial, but then within it, these little nested scenes where, in people's testimony, the police investigation is recreated person by person by person from each cop's perspective. And then you get to the alibi and gradually see the wall they've built, just the bricks getting pulled out, witness by witness by witness. And then you get the trial, the jury deliberating and convicting him with their verdict. Now there's one final step to all of this, which was here is how the sequence of the trial actually played out in real life. And I'll again read this, so don't sweat if you can't see it. So it was 3 days, Wednesday through Friday. They called Carrie Elliott first. That's the victim in this case. And I feel sort of moved to say that she passed away shortly after trial, so she wasn't an available resource to me. But she is survived by children and grandchildren, and I did reach out and did communicate with them about what this experience was like for them. I always feel a little bit weird. For purposes of the narrative, I'll refer to her as like the victim, but it was really important to me as the person telling a story that affected her in a really profound way. I mean, she's a human being just like Willie is. And so I didn't want her to be reduced to just the label of victim in this story. This is partly her story too. And so forgive me if you hear me refer to her sort of as shorthand as the victim. For narrative purposes, it makes sense. But in the book, I felt a real responsibility to do right by her. So they interviewed her first, then they called cop number 1, who was the first responder on the scene. That's what that says, first responder. It's mostly just a cue for me. Then cop number 2. Cop number 2 is the one who brought Carrie Elliott from the scene of the crime to the hospital. then we had cop number 3, who's actually the partner of cop number 1. And he interviewed Carrie Elliott after the hospital back at HPD. Basically, Carrie went home, hospital, police department, and cop number 3 interviewed her there. Then there was the sergeant who at first identified the suspect. Some of you might know from the book that the way Willie's name got introduced to this trauma in the first place was that several days after coming home from the hospital and the police department, Carrie was speaking with a neighbor, and a neighbor said, "I heard what happened, I'm so sorry," and Carrie described what she had been through, and the neighbor said, "I think I know someone who might match that description." And Carrie came to believe that this was the man. And so the sergeant is the one who showed her a lineup. There was an initial lineup in the night, in the first 24 hours, wherein Carrie did not recognize anyone. Then there was another lineup like a week later with Willie included after the neighbor mentioned his name, and Carrie believed she recognized him. So this sergeant is that guy who showed the lineup. Then there's an evidence technician who collected hairs and things from the scene, hairs and fingerprints. Then there's the lead investigator, who's the one who ended up arresting Willie. Then on Thursday you had the ER doctor at the hospital who, when Carrie was admitted, he was the one who examined her. You had an SBI forensic expert. SBI is the State Bureau of Investigation. He's the one who basically did all the tests on what the evidence tech had collected. Then you have Willie's girlfriend, who, as I said, is the one who sort of talked to the cops first. And then you have 8 of his friends and alibis. The night of the crime, Willie was across town at a house party with friends, and they were able to testify. A lot of these people were there at that party, and even those who weren't basically said, "This isn't Willie. There's no way this guy is the guy you're looking for." And then there were 3 of his aunts and uncles. On Friday, they finally called Willie, and then we had the jury deliberation and verdict. Now, it became clear to me that lawyers call witnesses in a sequence designed to build an argument. That is not what I was trying to do. I was trying to tell a story. There's already a fair amount, safety first, of bouncing around here. For this to work, the sentences have to be crystal clear. They have to be so clear that I can hold them up to the light and see right through them. We cannot confuse the reader. There are a lot of characters. There's a lot of moving parts. And the order in which attorneys called people did not work for me. And it did not work for the reader. It was out of sequence, and I didn't know what to do. So I did this. I moved the ER doc here. So now, Carrie Elliott, first responder cop, second responder cop who brings Carrie Elliott to the hospital, and then the ER doctor who she encounters at the hospital. Then I moved the evidence tech here. So you have the police investigation gradually up the chain to Willie being arrested, and then the evidence tech, and then the SBI forensic expert in sequence lay out the evidence against him once he's arrested. And then I moved Willie. Sorry, I'm working on sort of a small board. Where did I move Willie? Between I and J. Here. I know that's kind of a spaghetti scramble, but above here is crime, that's Carrie, and then police. All these are police now, in sequence, except for the hospital, the ER doc, who's part of that. And then Willie leads the alibi. He's the first alibi witness that readers encounter. And then you get saying, "Here's where I was." And then you get all his friends and alibis and family members saying, "Yeah," and one by one confirming where he was. Now, a quick note about the ethics of this. I write nonfiction. I think it's really important, if you're writing nonfiction, that it not be fiction. I think that writers who pretend their work is nonfiction, label it nonfiction, and then invent or fabricate or mislead are doing they're lying. They're doing a disservice to readers and a disservice to their colleagues. They're undermining the credibility of writers who are really doing the legwork to make sure things are accurate. I take that really seriously. And I think the ethics of this are like 85 to 90% common sense and 10 to 15% really interesting, nuanced judgment calls. There are occasionally cases where to be technically accurate actually makes the situation harder to understand, actually gets in the way of full clarity for the reader. And in my view, this was one of them. I have two questions that I ask myself if I feel an impulse to tinker with a historical record or with the way I'm telling something. Am I being misleading? And would a reasonable reader feel deceived? And if the answer to either of those two questions is yes, I can't do it. In this case, and there are only a couple cases over the course of the entire book where I did something like this, I thought the answer to both those is no. I don't feel I'm being misleading. I don't feel it. If a reader were to come up to me, I don't change a word of dialogue. I don't change any of the events of what people did or said. I also, in the narrative, did little things like I did not say, for example, the ER doc presented on a Wednesday. He didn't. So I didn't say that. I also even actually didn't say, after cop number 2, the ER doc testified. I didn't say that because that didn't happen. I wanted to be really fair in the way that I was phrasing things. And in the notes, I say, the order in which I present 3 of the witnesses of this trial is actually out of sequence in which they historically presented in the trial. I did that only for reasons of clarity. I didn't change any of their dialogue, any of the material. And I just thought, if a reader comes up to me after one of my events and says, I feel really deceived. I feel really burned. I was led to believe that the ER doc testified after before the lead investigator, and actually he testified before. I would say, yeah, I'm sleeping fine. I'm okay with the judgment call I made there. Yeah. So again, there are only a couple times I did this. It happened in each of the trials, actually. I think that's probably the only time in the entire book where I made a move in the telling that I knew was not exactly what happened. Because a trial is hard. A trial is thousands of pages, and there's so much irrelevant. I called it irreleventia. I don't know if that's a real word, but I had a folder called that of nonsense stuff. And my job is to try to help the reader understand what happened in a kind of humane way, in a kind of fair broker way. And I felt, just ethically, I was on firm enough ground. I felt comfortable doing this. It was sort of in service of the reader. I didn't feel it was an act of manipulation or deception. So, here's how it looks.